Okay, so I'm going to start us out with the CUPE equality statement. So union solidarity is based on the principle that union members are equal and deserve mutual respect at all levels. Any behavior that creates conflict prevents us from working together to strengthen our union. As unionists, mutual respect, cooperation, and understanding are our goals. We should neither condone nor tolerate behavior that undermines the dignity or self-esteem of any individual or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. Discriminatory speech or conduct which is racist, sexist, transphobic, or homophobic hurts and thereby divides us. So too does discrimination on the basis of ability, age, class, religion, language, and ethnic origin. Sometimes discrimination takes the form of harassment. Harassment means using real or perceived power to abuse, devalue, or humiliate. Harassment should not be treated as a joke. The uneasiness and the resentment that it creates are not feelings that help us grow as a union. Discrimination and harassment focus on characteristics that make us different, and they reduce our capacity to work together on shared concerns such as decent wages, safe working conditions, and justice in the workplace, society, and in our union. CUPE's policies and practices must reflect our commitment to equality. Members, staff, and elected officers must be mindful that all persons deserve dignity, equality, and respect. So that is the equality statement. I'm going to move over to a land acknowledgement. And so we would like to recognize the territory of which we congregate. In York Region, we live, work, and complete this meeting on the traditional lands and territory of a number of First Nations, including the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation and the Mississaugas of Credit, as well as the Huron-Wendat, Petun, and the Anishinaabe people. This area is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all eat out of the dish, all of us that share this territory, with only one spoon. That means that we have to share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, which includes taking care of the land and the creatures we share it with. Importantly, there are no knives at the table, representing that we must keep the peace. As union members, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here. We thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land. In doing so, we also pledge our unwavering commitment to continuously honor, protect, and sustain this land. So I'm just going to walk us through some house rules for tonight's panel discussion, and then I will introduce our panelists. I would like to let you know that we are implementing a zero tolerance for hate speech tonight. So if we are exhibiting that in the chat, or if somebody unmutes themselves and kind of goes off, then we'll be removing them from tonight's meeting. And finally, I'll introduce myself. So I am Chris Beery. I am the chair of the CUPE Local 905's LGBTQ Committee. I'm also treasurer for CUPE Local 905. And once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight for our first ever panel discussion. Like I've mentioned, this is a live streaming event on Facebook and YouTube. With me to help to facilitate tonight is our communications officer, Pascal Diverless, as well as our vice president, Rayanne Leeds. So thank you both for helping to support tonight. So just prior to introducing our panelists, which I'll do very shortly, I just want to start out with how this event came to be. 5 years ago, working with my employer and being out in the workplace seemed really difficult. It was around this time that CUPE Local 905 started an LGBTQ committee, and I jumped right on board because I didn't know that we had queer people in our workplace or in our employer, and I wanted to be able to progress our values further through this committee work. And so we really do try to work with our members and our communities at large from CUPE Local 905 to support moving forward LGBTQ plus and gender related issues in our workplace and union. And of course, the reason that we're all here. So we have put together 3 fantastic panelists, and I'm just introduce them one by one. On my page here. So first, I'd like to introduce Fred Hahn. Fred Hahn has been an active member of CUPE since 1991. As a local union activist and leader, Fred built experience as a steward, health and safety activist, and as a pay equity and contract negotiator. Elected to CUPE Ontario Executive Board in 1998, Fred served on many committees at all levels of the union and made labor history in 2009 when he was elected president of CUPE Ontario, the first LGBTQ person elected to lead the province's largest union. So welcome, Fred. Thank you. Super excited to have you. Next, we have Paige Galette. Paige is a Haitian activist and feminist. Paige Galette is passionately involved in political movements fighting for social justice, the labor movement, women's movement, queer movement, and the Black liberation. Paige served as Secretary Treasurer of CUPE 1281 and was a member of the Women's Committee of CUPE Ontario. Currently involved in the QT BIPOC collective, Northern Voices Rising. Paige's essay from Chicago to Sourdough, Reflections on Northern Living and Surviving While Being Black is featured in the book Until We Are Free, Reflections on Black Lives Matter in Canada. Thank you, Paige, for being here. We really appreciate it. And last, we have Adrienne Smith. Adrienne Smith is a transgender human rights activist and justice lawyer. They recently settled a BC Supreme Court case that guaranteed access to opiate replacement therapy for prisoners in BC jails. Adrienne appeared at the BC Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada, where they argued about the deleterious effects of mandatory minimum sentences for women, Indigenous people, and drug users. As a trade union activist, they advocate for transgender inclusion in our unions and workplaces. Adrienne volunteers at the Catherine White Holman Wellness Clinic, where they give free legal advice, take on human rights cases, and notarize name change documents for trans people. Thank you so much for being here, Adrienne. Awesome. So I'm super stoked, and I think that I'm gonna start us off with a discussion point. And I didn't plan an order of who was gonna speak first, so I'll let you, the panelists, kind of make that decision. But I wanted to start us out with, if the panelists could please share a story about how you got to where you are today as a queer labor activist. Who wants to go first? Okay, I'm gonna let Fred go first because Fred is smiling ear to ear. He's got all the things to say. I can hear it already.
Oh dear, I wasn't smiling for that reason. I was smiling because I was like, somebody else should go first. We're also Canadian. So let me just say thank you to Local 905 for convening this. It's incredibly important that you're doing this work, and it's deeply appreciated, not only by your members, but I would say by all of us in our union. I'll just quickly say that I'm the president of CUPE Ontario, and we're a big union in the province, and I never imagined in my wildest dreams that that would ever be what I did in my adult life. That was not part of the plan, nor was it part of something I thought was possible. I grew up in a household that nobody was in a union, in an area of the province where the union density is quite low. In a working class family where I watched my father. My mother died when I was quite young, and I watched my father deal with difficult employment, unemployment. We were on social assistance for a period. I figured out a way to get myself to university. I had the ability to study about unions at university. And when I studied about unions, I was like, boy, do I ever want to be in one. And then I got an opportunity to join a union when I got a job working with kids with developmental disabilities. And I was elated to be part of a union, and I became active in it as soon as my probationary period elapsed. And I always felt welcomed in my local union. It was a social services local in Toronto. a lot of women, a lot of queer and trans people, or queer people at least in those days, and a lot of racialized folks, a lot of Black folks working there. And I thought that's what CUPE was, really. And it wasn't until I went to my first provincial convention where I discovered that my local wasn't necessarily the way that all of CUPE is, because we're quite big and there's a lot of folks and a lot of differences in our union. My first convention, actually, at the provincial level, there was a debate about a woman's right to choose. And the resolution failed about the union supporting a woman's right to choose. That's how old I am. But it was a real eye-opener for me that our union wasn't necessarily everything I imagined it to be, and wasn't everything that I experienced in my own local union. I went on to be active in my local, and it was during the time of a provincial leader named Mike Harris, who was a conservative who many of you won't remember, you'll read about him in history. But what he did was he cut things across the board, including funding to the agency that I worked for. And our employer took that to great advantage. And the bargaining was terrible. It was the first time I was ever on a bargaining committee. There was 30 major concessions that they just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. Just before we were taking a strike vote, the woman who was president of our local union got a job somewhere else making more money because we made crap. And so we were all really happy for her. But then, like, who was going to be president? And there was a bit of a debate. And a number of other folks, women on our board had it was very common in our local union for people to have 2 and 3 jobs and for people to have kids. And so I kind of got nominated as the interim president. And I remember at the time saying to the staff rep assigned, like, I can't do that. Like, who that? I don't know nothing about this. Like, what? I'm just like, I'm part of the bargaining committee. I'm just learning. Like, I'm happy to what, you know. And she just said, it's okay. You can do it. It's fine. We'll be fine. And so we took a strike vote and we went on strike for 3 months. All of our members, and we beat back those concessions. And I get emotional about it because it was a really challenging time, but it was a great time. And it's one of the things that I feel like proved myself to the rest of CUPE. Because before that, when I was at events, I would openly be called a faggot. I was told by a member that I didn't belong in our union. This was, again, the days before we had an equality statement and before we did things the way that we do things now. But one of the things that this is a very personal thing for me. I spent my childhood and young adulthood, preschool, high school, feeling like an outsider and feeling like I needed to get to a place where I wasn't an outsider. I didn't feel like an outsider in my union. It was my union. And so be damned if anybody told me I didn't belong here. But in fairness, it wasn't until our local went on strike and I sort of proved to the rest of our union that I was in fact a trade unionist, not just one of those equality seekers, but I actually believed in workers' rights, that the doors became more open for me in terms of being elected at other levels. I know that, but I took full advantage of it because I believe that our movement, the labor movement, is an incredibly important part of a series of movements fighting for justice, that we have access to empowering people at a grassroots level that is incredibly important, and that we can do more than just negotiate collective agreements, but that we, and CUPE believes this, we are a social trade union. We believe in our members' rights, not just at work, but in their communities and in their lives. And it's part of what I love deeply about our union. And so that's, how I got started. And then a series of things just happened, and lo and behold, I became the president, and I'm still here. And it's great, and I love it. And I've talked too long, so I'm going to stop now.
Thank you so much, Fred, for being so vulnerable with us and sharing with us as well. I think that's so fantastic. And it's always interesting that us as activists who are, elected into these positions and grow throughout the union movement, that we really never expected to be here. we didn't expect really to be activists in our unions at this point or stage, right? Like it's one of those things that just kind of happens. So thank you so much. That's really awesome to share. I'm gonna go next to Paige, if that's okay, and then we'll do Adrienne.
Yeah, thanks so much. First, I want to recognize that I'm actually zooming in from what people known as White Horse, Yukon. I recognize that I'm on the territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and Tonquichan Council. And I know we do land acknowledgements, but I think it's important that we recognize why we do land acknowledgements. And I want to recognize that it's a privilege for us to have this conversation on lands that the traditional peoples are still fighting for and are still not recognized and are still having to showcase their resiliency. So I just wanted to mention that. As much as Whitehorse is beautiful and the sun's about to go down in like 2 minutes, for me it's important to recognize that I am here very privileged on resilient land. And where do I come from? I love, Fred, that you mentioned the Harris days. I think anybody knows who Harris is. Anybody knows who Harper is. It's those names that you're like, ooh, I do not want to marry into those names. I don't want to be associated to those names. It's like the Karens of the politics. And for me, my labor, my introduction to labor and to unionism was in the Harris days. I was 7 years old from London, Ontario, and my mom was a teacher. And of course, there was a strike. And my mom said, we are not going to school. We're not going to cross these lines. We are going to go and give out food and hot chocolate to the teachers that are on strike. And I didn't really understand. For me, I was like, what? All my friends are playing. It was also a major snowstorm, which is really unusual in London. And then once I was on the picket line, I did not want to leave. I was like, what? I want to come back and bring back hot chocolate to those teachers. Like, that's Madame Caron. I want to support Madame Caron. So it was really nice to see that. I got a huge pause from the labor movement until I joined the student movement. And within my time at the student movement, there was, of course, a lot of activism, but we talked a lot about activism as the students, but recognizing that students are also workers, and that to have student right is to have workers right. It doesn't, you can't have one without the other. If you're going to talk about student debt and eliminating student debt, you need to talk about an adequate living wage, and you need to talk about workers' rights. And so, of course, it was also at a time where I was like, oh gosh, what do I do after being elected at what was called then the Student Federation of the University of Ottawa, the Canadian Federation of Students? Where do I go? And for me, it was the natural path was the labor movement. I also had really close ties back then with the CUPE 1281, mostly because of the catchy, tiny but mighty union. And that as a tiny, mighty person, obviously was like, hey, I want to join this union. How do I get there? How do I support the workers? And understood that CUPE, and it's really exciting for me to come back in my CUPE roots. I was telling Chris before the panel, this is like your first union's like your family, in the sense that my CUPE roots reminded me that CUPE is a very active, organized, and on the front line union. I can't say that for any other unions. I won't drop names, but I can't say that for the other unions, right? There is certain unions are very much public service and showing off, and are afraid to be on the front lines, are afraid to challenge either Ford governments or other governments that are not supporting the workers. And so I learned a lot from CUPE, being, now I'm a PSAC person, and I learned that, just because you're public service doesn't mean, and of course we're not allowed to challenge the government, but doesn't mean you can't challenge. You can't, recognize workers' rights. in terms of my involvement in the union, I understood, I have to say, I understood tokenism very well. As much as I love being in the union, I understood that my voice was tokenized very often. You know, look at that Black woman, and I was Black woman before I even got to be a queer activist, before I even got to be a Black queer worker. And so, yes, when I was on the Women's Committee, it was really exciting because I was representing the racialized women. But as soon as I started talking about queer and the Black queer women, it was like a wait, we have a queer rep to speak about the queer issues. So I hope we have this conversation of, you know, where have we come from in the movement, but where can we go, and where do we go past the flags and the cakes and the representation? How do we make sure that intersectionality is within the labor movement? And just like the student movement, I think the labor movement, we show society things like how to do things. We show society that we can think outside the box, we can push the limits, and that we will win. And I do believe that CUPE is one of the labor unions here on Turtle Island that have proven that year after year. And I hope that will continue to prove that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paige. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's so cool that we can, like, you know, at the age of 7, that you found that energy and that charge for solidarity, right? Like, that's so empowering. And then being able to continue to like bring that through and like remember that like that's where you got like, that was the catalyst, right? Like that was the lightning bolt that got you started. And even though like you became involved later in life, but that's so cool. That's really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Adrienne.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm zooming in from the unceded, stolen, occupied territory of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish people. And I say that very much like Paige, because it's not the time at the beginning of a social justice talk to do it and move on, but because I'm very mindful of my incandescent, uninvited white settlerness and the great advantages that are built into colonialism for me, whether I want them or not. And as Uncle Ben says to Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And because I benefit from this unfair structure, it's my job to help to dismantle it. Never to lead, that's for Indigenous folks to do themselves and for us to support if we are not Indigenous ourselves. But I can't imagine any kind of reconciliation that isn't preceded by a decolonizing that necessarily implies the payment of reparations and the return of land. I'll challenge the government. It's not my employer at the moment. Let me say all the things. I also want to thank all of you for being here. It's been so long since I've been in a room full of people who share my values and have me smiling through the whole meeting. I would like frankly celebrate a move to amend the agenda at this point. But I've missed folks. So thank you for this feeling, of course, is called solidarity. Like Paige, I was raised in the movement. My parents met in the NDP on an election campaign, which is in a doomed to fail election campaign in Montreal. He was a teacher, she was a PSCC activist, and just like Paige, we went to school one day and the teachers were striking and we stayed to picket with them because that's what you do. And I was raised having a kind of rage against difference and division, and the union seemed like the party, like a really natural or a very fitting container. And I don't think I had realized until I was first elected steward of the sanitation yard by the garbage truck workers, where I was working in my first local, which is 23. It's Burnaby Municipal Workers. I drove a garbage truck. It's how I put myself through university. I didn't realize that it was reflecting the values that I had been raised with. I thought, oh, this union's really cool. It feels like home. Oh, it's because solidarity is also a community feeling and it's a set of values that you're raised with. Yeah, I had the misfortune to go to a school that was not a CFS school. I went to a school that had a different federally liberal student association. And I was very jealous of folks who had a CFS as a place to be. I instead spent my youth in the CUPE Youth Committee, and I was often quite tokenized as a young person. I did not realize how long the relationships with our employers and with everybody else in the movement lasts, that we're here together forever. It is really a family reunion every convention that we go to. And I got really my first real taste of action and activism, which I think is the next question. So I won't get too into it, but I was on strike with CUPE 2278, which was academic workers at UBC, and we were ultimately legislated back to work. And that was fundamental and transformative for me. And I think it taught me something much more important than I was learning at graduate school. And I think after that, I became quite disillusioned with academia, and I went to work frontline shelter with CUPE 1004, where I worked for the New Fountain, which is Portland Hotel Society, which is the organization that operates Insight, which was Canada's first supervised injection facility. And it was frontline and it was gritty, but I knew that the other members of my union really had my back, because this solidarity is also a value. I think much like Fred, the union was a safe place for me to be out as a queer person and out as trans later. My workplace was not always, but the union always was, and not just in pink triangle spaces, although those are really important, but to be able to have support from unexpected places. When we were having a conversation about pronouns on the floor of the BC Federation of Labor, the president of Longshore Canada stood up, and he's this great, large, burly white guy with a mustache, and they cut his mic off and it didn't matter. People could still hear him. And he was up there telling the group about his kids who he thinks are daughters, but as soon as they have another idea, then he's going to love them just as much. And having people like really model and show alliances across the silos that we're sometimes put into. So the union was a safe place for me. I also found it to be a very significant structure for fairness, and not just the grievance committee, but the way that our union particularly does political action and interfaces with government, which is why you all need to listen and pay attention for the otherwise seemingly boring political action report, and get on that committee, because this is how actual change happens in the law, in the world, in an enforceable way. And I didn't know that until I came to CUPE, and it's just a lifelong skill, and where as a lawyer now I'm having the most success is in conversations with government that don't hate us.
That's so fantastic, Adrienne. Thank you so much for sharing. I think I'm going to actually start with you for our next question, because I think you kind of had a great segue and it's already like in your head. And so our next question was to ask our panelists about notable actions that you exhibited as a queer labor activist or while organizing throughout your career. Like, what are some of the really notable things where you like came out front and you were like, we really rallied our members and we did this way, and it was, you know, it failed or it was fantastic, right? Like, I think we only learn from failure anyways. But do you want to share one of those experiences, Adrienne?
Sure. We also had Mike Harris here. We had a Gordon Campbell, and there was a freeze on public sector wages. I was impossibly young, it seems now, teaching assistant at UBC. I made less than $500 a check, and that was it. There's tuition on top of that. So we argued it was a condition of employment, and some other teaching assistant unions in our same city were doing better than we were, and we asked for parity for them. Also, our employer wanted to take away our health benefit, which was a sum total of $100 per member per year. And they wanted to claw this back. And I had come out of a very established industrial municipal local that had lots of structures, lots of funding for education, but it was very stable in its structure. People weren't moving on. And when I had taken a year off school, I thought I was gonna, find myself or something. And I got back to school after that year off and I thought, oh, I'm gonna finish my thesis and be done. And then I saw the sign that said union meeting this way. And that was the end of that. We went on strike because bargaining was going badly. It was an interesting union and quite the opposite of my municipal local because people had to reapply for their jobs every 3 months. They were part-time workers. They were not supported. Much of the work happened unsupervised from home. And there was this great difference across the university about how, whether you got an office, whether you had support, whether there was you could get photocopies. There were no standards and there was really no union. There had been a union. There was staff people who managed it. But in terms of an activist fighting force, we were new. And so one day we told the employer that we're not going to take their concession proposal. It was less than zero, actually. The university's bargaining agent who had come from Canada Post told us that he wouldn't give us the change in his pocket and that we were getting goose eggs. This is like what he said at the table. So that's the tone. So we took a strike vote and people said, yeah, let's go. This is outrageous. Many people came to the meeting to stop us because they just wanted to finish their research. And by the end of the meeting, they were like, no, okay, this is terrible. What can we do? Which was a transformative union meeting for me. And I'm still not sure how we did that. But the most important part, the punchline is we went on strike for 3.5 weeks. We were legislated back to work. And then in binding arbitration, we got an 11.5% increase over 3 years at a time of public sector wage freezes. But the point I want to tell you about is not that whole story. I want to tell you what happened after we took our strike vote. And we had people sign up in front of the main library, which is like this big monumental parade area. And we had 3 or 4 tables where people could sign up for picket duty at a time that fit with their classes, because our plan was never to shut down the institution. It was rather to be very inconvenient, and we succeeded. So the library is here. We've got our tables. The main administration building is right there. And throughout the day, because we were there all day, we see various administrator faces becoming increasingly worried, which thrilled us. But a magic thing happened because members who had never met each other, there were 2,500 of us, were there ready to sign up in a ledger for a time to do their 12 hours of picketing, which was what most of our work weeks were. And they met each other and talked to each other for the first time. And they got out of their offices and they were like, oh, what do you do? Well, I'm a philosophy doctoral student. Oh, great. Do you study like Descartes? And they're like, no, I study this obscure Czech guy that no one's ever heard of. How about you? I'm a botanist. Oh, so you have a plant? Yeah, that's my organism right there. Oh, is it good for medicine or something? No, it's a weed. And then after that part got over, we started talking about what it was like to be TAs for this university that so clearly hated us and disrespected us so much. And that just instant of having some connection beyond the little siloed spots that we were all in at our separate workplaces started something that was reinforced a little bit later when the Vancouver and District Labor Council executive, who were like very different from us demographically in many ways, came to picket with us. And then people are like, why, why are they here? And it's like, well, because we're all in the same family. And to have like gruff rail workers and the postal union woman just like to come up to folks who had no contact with the labor movement, or if they had, it had not been pleasant, really built us into something that sustained until now. It's a fighting union as a result of that strike. And the TAs from York sent us all their safety vests, which was like, it felt like a really good heritage to put on.
That's so awesome. That's fantastic. Like, yeah, I'm speechless. I'm just like goosebumps. That's so cool. Yeah. Paige or Fred, would one of you like to share your experience?
Fred's pointing at me. All right, I'll take it. Yeah, there's never I find in union activism, there's never one that I can pinpoint, because I find it's always nice to have a win, and even small wins, right? I'm thinking of, going back to 1281. That's for I mean, I'm here in Whitehorse, and 1281 is still fighting with employers like RSU, and these it brings you back in the, oh yeah, I stand with Jillery, that was great, we won that, we can win again. I see I'm not there, but still support the other CUPE locals. I'm thinking of when I was at Ottawa, the workers of Aramark, the food workers at Carleton went on strike, and we went to support them. And the fun things that we did to support them, giving out cookies to students and to faculty, and saying, hey, you like these cookies? Great. These cookies will no longer exist because the Aramark workers will no longer exist. York University also has food service workers that also went on strike. And the conversations that are on the picket line, I've never really loved picket lines. It's not my thing. Just standing outside, pacing left, right, and center. I like to go and meet people and be like, hey, have you heard of why we're on strike today? But being here in Whitehorse, a couple years ago, I had the honor and privilege of coordinating one of Yukon's longest strike. It was the mental health service workers that were out on strike. And I got called in a couple weeks into the strike, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get the workers to be supported and encouraged to picket line when it's minus 35 degrees Celsius? I've never seen that in my life. And I think, we always say when there's a will, there's a way. Being on that picket line was the most important thing I had ever witnessed. Seeing people so deceived and upset, but saying, I don't care, my employer deserves to know that I have a right to be in this workplace. I have a right to dignity and respect, and I will be here in minus 35, minus 40 degrees to let people know. Was a really intense moment of tenacity for me. That being said, not everyone was happy to be in minus 35. It's hard, right? Because sometimes you're like, why am I out here? But when we saw people driving by and supporting us, that was huge. Here in Whitehorse, we have we're very community based. We have these folks that have bought a decommissioned garbage truck, and around Christmas time goes around the city and calls himself Garbage Truck Santa. And as someone, I like to support people, but sometimes you're like, I don't know what your politics are about. I don't know if I should be supporting you. It was really endearing to see Garbage Truck Santa come to the picket line, stop, and because everybody knows Garbage Truck Santa, everyone saw the picket line. And so what was Adrienne saying about solidarity? Sometimes it comes out of people you never thought of, right? Who would have thought Garbage Truck Santa and Mama Claus would come to the picket line, stand in I think it was minus 38 degrees that day, and say, I'm here with my garbage truck in solidarity for mental health workers. What a wonderful moment. So these actions sometimes can seem so deceiving, or you're like, it's been done before. How many times can I sing solidarity forever? I don't feel strong today. But sometimes those little actions and that show the bigger tenacity. And that's what's really important within the movement. And that solidarity, I think if we are able to rally for mental health workers, for garbage truck workers, for the city workers, we are also able to rally for their identities. We are also able to rally for their well-being, respect, and dignity as queer workers, as racialized workers, as workers with various disabilities.
That's so good. Thank you, Paige, for sharing. Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think for me, being treasurer of a local where we have 16 collective agreements that are actively being bargained, or hopefully actively being bargained during COVID times, right? These are things we got to think about. How are we going to get folks out there at negative 35 and you know, stand up for their rights and recognize that like we're not just going to roll over as workers, that like we can continue to progress, and the union's the place that you can do that. And I think that's really cool. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Fred, in the essence of time, do you want to share a quick story, or would you like us to go on to the next question?
Can I be super quick? Because I have like a part of a theme thing here.
Love it.
I mentioned the strike that happened in our local 30 concessions that would have actually rolled back wages, but also people's vacation and all kinds of, anyway, whatever. In the midst, I wasn't necessarily out in my local union. I was just the acting president. And not that, I mean, it's kind of weird because most people who see me think you're queer from outer space, right? Like people know, but I still had lots of coworkers who were trying to set me up with their daughters and wondering why I didn't have a girlfriend. Like, you seem like such a nice guy. Extra, which is people probably know, a queer trans newspaper that used to actually print a newspaper, did a profile on me about 2 months into the strike. So this is 2 months into the strike. We went on strike November the 22nd. We were on strike over Christmas. It was hard. And they did a profile on me as a gay trade union leader, and that was cool. And the employer went and picked up every copy they could. And they took them to picket lines, particularly to Black women at picket lines who they knew were quite religious. And they found women, because we actually had people who were praying. We had a prayer circle who prayed. That was their picket duty, because, you know, we could use all the help we could get. They sent managers to those houses with those, with Extra, and said, this is who your president is. And we had weekly membership meetings during the strike. And I'll never forget, after that came out, that after the membership meeting, they were always raucous, 700 people in a room meant for 500. It was wild days. And after one of those meetings, a bunch of the women took me aside in the back of the room. And they said a couple things to me. They said, first of all, Fred, you swear too much during meetings, and you really got to figure that out. And I said, I know, you're right, I'm sorry. I'll try and do better. And they said, and we have this. And they showed me the Extra. And they said, we want you to know something. The employer brought this to us, and they think it's going to break our solidarity. But we just want you to know we're praying for you. But it doesn't change what we're doing here. What we're doing is right for us. And I said, you keep praying for me, not because of who I am, but because I can use all the help I can get, as we all can, during this strike. And we're just going to keep going together. They tried to use this to break our strike, and they were not successful in doing so. And that was a really, I was afraid about what would happen there, but it worked. Because solidarity is strong and it is powerful. And at the end of the day, these might not be things that you knew anything about. You might not know a gay person in your life, but those workers knew that the employer was trying to screw us. And they were trying to make our members pay the price of government decisions, and they were having none of it. And they were not letting anything break our solidarity. And that is why, one of the many reasons why I love our union.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred. Yeah, some very vulnerable moments that you're sharing with us. I really do appreciate that. And I mean, that's just so, I can't even think about like why an employer would do that, right? Like, it's just so degrading and terrible that those things have happened. But here we are today, right? And look who ended up on top, right? So that's so great. I really do appreciate that. I just want to remind folks that you can feel free to post questions in the chat, or if you're viewing us on one of our streaming services, that you can also post questions there. We have one final question for the panel, and then we will take further questions from folks listening in. And so this question is definitely like a reflective question, and I'd like to know what advice you'd give yourself as a queer labor organizer. Yeah, that's the question. I'm going to start us out with Paige this time, if that's okay. And then we'll do Fred and then Adrienne, if that's okay.
Is it what did you know what, I won't even ask. I'll just say I think as a as an activist before, when I first started, I think I would give myself, because it's nice to reflect on where we came from and how far we've come along. And, you know, any feelings that you have or questioning that you have is normal. It's valid. And to not be afraid of you know, speaking your truth. We hear it all the time. I'm kind of, there are words that I'm kind of annoyed at, you know, equity, diversity, inclusion, speaking your truth. I'm annoyed at them because of like, people have taken them and flipped them, remixed them, Missy Elliott something with them, and not with the intentions that they were supposed to be. And for me, it's speak your truth also means that within the labor movement, recognize that it's not a perfect movement. And it's not a movement that was created for us nor by us. And we have a lot to do. We have a lot of work to do. You know, and again, yes, these spaces are important. I hope people don't think they're just saying, oh my God, Paige is crapping on spaces. No, these spaces are important. These committees are important. The raising of the flag is important. But we need to ask ourselves, what is raising of the flag when you as a queer worker can't even go to work in a safe environment? What is raising of a flag when you as a queer worker don't even have mental health or sick days or days where you can go and access the health care that you need? And so I'd like to push moving forward is that, yes, we've come a long way, but we have a longer way to go. Look at your collective agreements. And when you're, you know, I heard you might be looking at them right now, and in bargaining, look at who's at the table of bargaining. Is it representative of your members and of the members you don't see? Are you talking about access to benefits for trans workers? Are you talking about access to benefits to workers that are queer, that are trying to have families, that don't, you know, can't access the way that we understand conception? Go beyond, because that's what we do as a labor movement, is we go beyond and we push those boundaries, and we set the precedent for the workers that aren't unionized, for the workers that are afraid to be unionized. I can't believe employers do that. Yeah, some employers are nasty, but we could be nastier by allowing space for people who aren't there already. And that's the advice I'd give for all of us, really.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, this is such a hot button issue for me because for my employer, due to some relegated, outdated policy, they refuse to fly a pride flag because then they'll need to fly all the flags, right? And you know, how do we ensure that we're representative of everybody and have a flag for everybody? That seems like a lot of work. Yeah, so you know, definitely pulls on some heartstrings. And you know, how do we as workers, or even in the community, like you want to be able to see yourself in the services that you're accessing. You want to know that those are safe spaces for you. And like, sometimes it's tokenistic, but sometimes it says like, this is an okay place. Like you're going to be fine here. And like, I think that, you know, that overall is just really important. And so, yeah, I really thank you for that, Paige. We're going to go next to Adrienne and then Fred.
I was going to say, you know, the divisions we have in the world, we also have within our organizations, and you need to pick your battles and not get mad about everything. And you need to find your people to survive because you have family here and you need people who get it. But instead, I'm going to tell you a story about direct collective action. There's an office. There's a gross manager who's sexually harassing one of our coworkers. And she has not passed her probation yet. She's racialized, she's auxiliary, and she is not going to say anything about it. But the rest of us called up the regional office and got a box of whistles that happened to say CUPE on them in fuchsia. And every time that manager says something gross to her, we're all going to blow our whistles. And if some of us don't feel safe blowing our whistles, that doesn't matter, because the rest of us are loud enough and we can use our permanent status and our full-time hours as cover for the others. 2 or 3 whistles, that behavior has stopped. No grievance, no arbitration, no human rights complaint, just an end to it. Nothing illegal, nothing we're gonna get fired for, but just no, you are not doing that to our sister. That's why we're here. That's what this is about. That's why our work is anti-oppressive and it's intersectional by nature, because none of us are free until we're all free.
Thank you, Adrienne. Yeah, that's so good. I mean, it's collective action in the workplace, right? It's tell these people, like, we deserve respect. And I think that that's so good that that's such a great example of a workplace action. Like, I want to do that tomorrow. Fred, share with us.
Gosh, I have no idea. I'm going to follow on that because that just made me feel so damn good. I would just, what's the advice I would give to myself back in the day that I think is still relevant now? It's kind of picking up on what both Paige and Adrienne said. We are a movement of people. That means we're not perfect. How do we expect us to be better than the shit we're soaking in? Sorry, I said I swore a lot, didn't I? Like, we're soaking in anti-Black racism. We're soaking in homophobia and transphobia. We're soaking in this shit. We were taught it in overt and covert ways for so long. But part of what the union can do, part of what our union can do, is help us unlearn that. I always think of it like poison. We've all been poisoned for years in so many ways, but the union can be the antidote. It really can be. It can be. It is not easy. And sometimes that antidote, you know, you get a reaction to that antidote and you kind of have to whatever for a bit, but it can make us all better and stronger folks together. I'll just close by saying, I think I mentioned that at my first national convention, a guy came over to me and told me I didn't belong in the union. Many years later, I was part of the Pink Triangle Committee nationally, and we wrote a course, a training course called Pride in CUPE. It was all about fighting homophobia in those days. It was before we started talking about transphobia in CUPE. Yep, I'm old. We couldn't get this course put on because in CUPE you have to request a course, right? You have to have enough people to put it on. And so provincially, we passed a resolution that said that every member of the provincial executive board had to go back to get their local executive boards trained in Pride in CUPE. And so I went off to a northern community, a municipal local, the president of that local was part of the provincial executive board. They complied with this resolution that we passed, and they had all of their board members ready for the training. And in I walked as the facilitator. And guess who was one of the participants? The guy who told me I didn't belong in the union. And what was great about that was that we bonded in a way that is fantastic. He participated in that training. He grew from our union. And I get emotional about that because he was poisoned. And our union helped to heal him and bring it all back together. That's so powerful. And that work isn't done. That work is ongoing, in not just in Local 905, in all of our locals. It's part of our work. It's part of the work that we do as a union to deal with transphobia and homophobia, to deal overtly with anti-Black racism in ways that we have just begun to scratch the surface, to deal with real accommodations for workers with disabilities and members with disabilities, to really deal with these issues. It's a long struggle, but the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. Our job is to make it bend.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. That's so fantastic. And I think it's so interesting that, like, and it's absolutely that we've been poisoned, right? Like, there are entire generations of people in our workforces and in our communities that have been taught to be racist, have been taught to be homophobic, have been taught to be against trans rights, the woman's right to choose, etc. Right? Like, the list goes on, and all we can do is work on helping folks unlearn those pieces and providing the space and education for them to move forward. And I think that that's so great that, you know, each of us is a part of that movement. Each of us, you know, this conversation is a part of that movement. And I think that that's just really fantastic. I really appreciate it. Okay, I'm gonna open the floor for questions. And I've got Ashley's hand up. Ashley, please go ahead.
Hello. Okay, so I feel like we have gotten a little deep into things, which is awesome, and I love hearing everything, but I have a very basic question. So I work in an environment that's pretty, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of targeting if you get involved in the union, it's very hush-hush, and a lot of people do not want to get involved. So basically, I was just going to ask, because you guys, like you folks have seriously gone through quite a bit of hardship and a lot of challenges. So for people who are just getting started or trying to inspire others to even come to a union meeting, sort of what tactics and like advice would you have for a workplace that's so full of fear and I don't know, like how to start igniting a little bit of oomph into people to actually even just to attend and be present, and because we know we have these major issues, but unless we get numbers, I don't know how we're going to do it together, right? That's all. So please, thank you.
Yeah, I saw Adrienne's hand shoot up like right away. So I'm gonna start
that. Adrienne's like, yep, on it.
Go ahead.
One of the hats that I wore recently was as a staff rep for the Canadian Labour Congress, which is an umbrella group that supports unionized workers in small geographical areas and makes labor councils. And they're struggling with this same thing. How do you make people come to the meeting? Forget the meeting. The meeting is for business. It should be as long as the business is. We're never going to do any reports just for the sake of reports. You're going to meet people in much more meaningful ways like this. You're going to meet them at union organized coffee. You're going to meet them if your union does like a 15-minute welcome introduction to social justice Zoom, or here's a bargaining update on Facebook and not the bulletin board, and talking to people where they're at, finding ways to allow people to participate if they've got young ones or elders they've got to care for. There's no reason you can't listen to the treasurer's report while you're folding your laundry. And this pandemic has taught us that this is actually possible. There's no reason for us to be at a meeting because the union's not meetings. The union is the solidarity that we hold in our hearts. We just need to have it lit by having it exposed to other people who share our values. And I'm not sure what the magic way to connect folks in your struggle right now is, but it's not a meeting. It might be union education. That was the thing for me. I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could. So my local sent me to everything. And then they accidentally made me a lawyer because it turned out I liked it and I was good at it. I think also it's useful to think about any setbacks that we have as really temporary. That's a moment, but we fixate on these, or we win something and we forget to celebrate and we move on to the next big struggle. So I think we need to spend more time together in a setting that's not, doesn't have an agenda, and we need to have more parties.
Awesome, totally agree. Fred,
Just to add to that, yeah, you know, Ashley, look at, I was gonna say, look around you, but we're not really around, but look at the people that are here today. And I'm totally against this whole, what happens in the workplace stays in the workplace. This space has been created today. You know, use that opportunity to say, I need support, I need solidarity. And there are ways that other locals can come in and support the workplace. That's definitely something I've learned through CUPE 1281, right? Like the most recent campaign with I Stand with Jewelry, you know, bringing that issue out in the forefront and saying, look at what the RSU employees are doing. Showed other workplaces, you don't want to be in that workplace, right? It starts that conversation of, okay, we don't want to be in that workplace, so we're going to support our union family. But B, it also shows for the other employers, because employers talk as much as we as workers talk. Hey, what are you doing? What is this? You just fired a mother on mat leave? How bad could that be? You know? So I think utilize the spaces, a little bit of what Adrienne said, that are already created. And I say be creative. And I think this is a lot of my personal growth nowadays is in terms of that workspace. And yes, workspaces are important. But if you are feeling that stress, somebody else is feeling that stress. And if you and I'm gonna see you as white presenting are utilizing that stress, there is somebody who is further marginalized that isn't even able to come in this space today and say, I don't feel good, I don't feel comfortable. Or there's somebody who's on a part-time basis or who is on contract that is dealing with even more stress. And so, there's a reason why we say the, strength in numbers is because when you rally those numbers, you can rally against the one employer that's being crap, whether it's putting whistles to their ears, or it's being creative with their workspace. Together, you're able to make change. So utilize the spaces that are already there, but also reach out to the members that may not have already addressed that. And even a conversation of, do you feel this? Can we talk about this in a non-work, non-union setting will help. And, maybe post-COVID karaoke will be back. I bet a lot of people through karaoke or through those spaces that weren't union spaces, there's union bars. COVID's gonna bring us this, how do we mobilize in a way that we didn't know before? But the joy about COVID is I'm calling you from 5,000 plus kilometers away. You can reach people from other places. Talk to the people that are Dominion workers right now, that are that are under that thumb of Galen Weston. Reach out to them through Twitter, through Facebook, and see if they can take a break from their picket line to come support you in the workplace and think of other creative ways to be in solidarity.
Thank you.
Fred,
And I'll just quickly say that sometimes when you're in a workplace like the one you talked about, Ashley, can feel like really lonely. And so having support networks like this one is super important. But I just really want to reinforce that union meetings are important. They are not all that. And that direct kind of talking to folks or encouraging a way to talk to folks that isn't necessarily about the union, first of all, helps to build some yeah, I think it is shitty that they do that to us. Yeah, I kind of agree. Yeah, that makes it hard for me over here too, whatever. And then it's kind of we could deal with that. I think, we have this union thing. I think that could work, right? There's a way to kind of do it. Because don't forget, our members are our members not because they chose a union. Our members are our members because they got a job somewhere. And many of them come from places like the one I came from. I was in a household that nobody was in a union. I didn't know anything about unions. I only heard and people hear people talk smack about unions, right? And people are afraid. And so instead of focusing on that fear, thinking about some different ways around it can work. It takes some time. And as long as I think you got a network in Local 905 that will help to feed your soul while you're doing that important work.
Thank you very much. Sorry, my husband's making fun of me because I keep nodding my head. He's like, okay, relax. I'm like, but I am agreeing, okay? And I'm taking notes. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Adrienne,
I think it's useful also to notice that you do have some privilege and use it for good. So when you're feeling small, find someone who is doing less well than you, give them a call, say you love them, help them up, send groceries, follow up about that sick kid. And I think the good and welfare part of the union meeting is the most important part. If you have a formal part when you talk about folks who are off sick or people who've had new little ones or some development that's not work related, but it's about our family. And when I'm feeling down, I call someone and I tell them, you're great. Your work matters. It matters you got up today. And sometimes people call me like that. So just pass the good you have around.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So, sorry, Pascal's messaging me and I'm just trying to keep track of it all. So, I do want to let folks know that there's lots of love from Facebook, which is absolutely fantastic. Can't wait to see what the results of tonight have. And yeah, like I think, do we have any other questions or, okay, yeah, Sharon, hey, you've got your hand up, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. First and foremost, thank you, everyone. It's so exciting to hear you guys being so vulnerable and sharing these experiences. So I just want to thank from the bottom of my heart for your vulnerability and for sharing your truth. Paige had mentioned this, and please, anyone feel free to kind of respond to this. Paige, when you spoke, you talked about intersectionality, what it is to live a life as a racialized person who is queer, and we also have folks who may be disabled and other avenues that they're experiencing difficulties in. How have all of you really kind of worked within your unions to educate them when they about intersectional experiences, when they kind of struggle with these basic things like identities and dealing with racialized folks? So if you guys have any sort of recommendations, that'd be great. And thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon, for bringing that up. That is a whole webinar and workshop in itself. And that workshop and webinar with racialized folks, it's like would be totally different than what I'm gonna say. So I just want to acknowledge that for the white folks, this is a kitchen conversation. That I will say things, but I think it's important that you also hear what can be privy sometimes. And it is hard. When I say the labor movement has not been created for us nor by us, it is hard. Look at the websites, look at the leadership. Sorry, Fred, to put you on the spot, but not just CUPE, right? Look at Unifor, look at all the other PSAC, look at the leadership, steelworkers, carpenters, look at the leadership. It is hard to challenge leaders who love their positions and their pensions and their spots. And you're like, we get it, you did great work, and we need to acknowledge the work you did, but we too can do great work. You need to trust us. And so I think that's a conversation that we're talking about now. I'm from PSAC. I'm sure you've all seen in the news. There's a lot of conversation around anti-Blackness at PSAC, and people are uncomfortable. And a lot of workers at PSAC National will say, it's hard for me to go out and bargain for the workers when myself, I don't feel comfortable in my workplace. And so the first place that we can start, and I would challenge any union, not just CUPE, all of the unions, to do an audit of how many people have you hired for the constituencies that you claim to represent in the past 5 years. We won't go 10, but we'll go with the past 5 years. And what can you do to ensure that these folks not only come into these leadership, management, director positions that aren't just the equity reps, because we too are great negotiators. We too are great at bargaining. We too are great mobilizers. We too are great campaign activists. Like, look at us. How do we make sure that we are in those positions, not just for the 1 year or the 2 years or the next 5 years, but generations to come? And also finally, I like to say, you take space, but you leave space. We always talk about taking space, and convention is really important. Go to the mic, take that space, but also leave space for people who need to take that space as well. Create those spaces, continue to create those spaces, have these conversations, have workshops or webinars that we're having right here, but make sure that your leadership is also on these webinars, that it's not just the people on the ground towns that are having these conversations, because if it doesn't go up, you don't have the adequate representation, and you're not talking about the labor movement as the labor movement is here in Canada, or on Turtle Island, I should say. So thank you so much. I hope CUPE 905 has this conversation solely for racialized workers, solely for queer and trans workers. Like, the conversation would be totally different. And it's not me throwing shade. I hope y'all don't call, you know, oh my God, Paige said this and that, whatever. I said what I needed to say, but it is important to have these conversations and have it with the people at the leadership positions as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, you know, it's so interesting to, like, it's exactly that, right? The union is a construct, right? We are a construct just like our employers, just like provincial and municipal governments, like, and that adaptation takes time and energy and effort. And, you know, the nice thing with our local is we have 3 very progressive leaders on this call now from 905 leadership, our president included. And so, we are having those conversations, and some of them are difficult and they don't always go the best way or the way that we expected them to or anticipated, but those are active conversations in our local in addressing those issues for sure. Adrienne, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
I think it may be useful for people who are afraid to talk about racism. I'm looking at my white people, to think about all the divisions that keep us apart. These categories come from outside. Some of them are imposed by our employer in job class, for example. If you're winning any binary in the world, it's your job to reach across that binary and to lift up people who aren't doing as well as you, and then work to dismantle that binary. We need to break the glass floors while we're breaking the glass ceilings and lift each other up. It's the tax that you must pay on your privilege. And white people, we're so used to being comfortable. And we don't want to talk about how we're complicit in a system that is acting a genocide and has been for more than 500 years. We benefit from it. We're complicit in it. These things are not debatable. That's a true thing. But what do we do from here? What are we going to do about that? We need to have conversations that don't burden Black, Indigenous, mixed race, and people of color with our feelings. We need to do that work among ourselves. White people need to talk about white supremacy. And we need to make a plan to support people. We can't deny it anymore. You need to go to your racist uncle's Thanksgiving and have this conversation at the supper table. You can't unfriend those Facebook people. You have to do the work. In the same way that violence against women doesn't go away until men talk about it, in the same way that we're not going to get to decolonize if we keep supporting a structure that supports a colonial state. We're not going to recover or heal from racism until we admit that it's happening, that we are active parts of it until we're not, and that we have an obligation as white people to be uncomfortable. Because people who aren't white are in danger, and that's really different than being uncomfortable.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. I really appreciate that. I think you're right on it, right? It's a lot for us to digest for sure. That's good. I'm gonna move us forward to a question that came in through Facebook. And the question is, what are the best qualities a steward can have to support queer and trans workers facing issues in the workplace? I'll let anybody grab that.
An unconditional positive regard and some humility. New stewards I was afraid that I would do something wrong or that I didn't know all the things. When people need a steward, they really need a steward. And they need a steward who's going to hear them, who's going to see them, and who's not going to judge them for who they are, and is going to help them and support them with the workplace and the life problem that they have. You can't just say, oh, I'm only helping you with your Article 19 problem. I'm going to help you with the fact that this is super stressful and you're a member of my union family. And you don't need to know the answers, but you need to hear people, and they need to know that you've got them and that you understand what the problem is. And you can repeat that back to them and use the language that they use so you don't accidentally insult anyone. Ask for gentle clarification, but not so you're into anybody's business. If somebody's being harassed because they're trans, it's not okay to ask them what's in their pants, but to say, for my file, can you remember, if it's okay, what exactly your manager said, so that we could put in a grievance if you want to file one. And don't pretend that you know about people's lives when you don't. Don't pretend you know about people's culture when you don't, but use everything that you have and all the toolbox in your language to signal to them that you're open and that you're willing if you're not in the community. There's a shortcut if you're in community, which is what I say to my clients. And I say, after we talk about solicitor-client privilege, I say, I'm a trans person too, so I don't need a big explanation about your life. So if you're in there, tell us so. It saves a lot of time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Anything that Fred or Paige that you want to add on to that?
I would just add to that. Yes. Everything Adrienne just said. And understand you don't need to know all the answers. And be honest about that with people. But start from a place of, my job is to help you. And my job is not to know that the collective agreement doesn't have an article that speaks specifically about what you just said. My job is to help you. That's really, like, I think, fundamental basic advice for any steward. Sometimes we get schooled by our organizations to think that the job of a steward is to know the collective agreement super well and to be able to tell a worker whether or not they have a grievance. And I think that I've always found that challenging, because there's always a way to file a grievance. Always, on any topic of any kind, always. But I think it's really important, like, listening, acknowledging when you don't know, saying that you're going to go find out for them, and getting back to them and keeping that contact happening is really the key. And it may be that they say to you, I don't want to file a grievance. There have been hundreds of workers that I've dealt with in that way. But that you did that will mean a lot for that person.
For sure. Paige?
I just want to add, I'm happy Fred went first, because I want to add to that is recognize the things that aren't in the collective agreement. And, you know, if you went through a representation that was hard, and most of the times, I'm sure people know, thanks Fred for saying that, a lot of people know that people won't file grievances because they're afraid of the workplace, they're afraid of reprisal, they're afraid of, you know, the same way there's many ways of filing grievances, employers have many ways to fire us. And so I think really good stewards will take note of those tough times so that it is not tough for the next person to file a grievance. So when you see things, you know, especially, I always say discrimination, because gosh, those discrimination clauses are so weak. You know, whenever you see discrimination, harassment, which is most likely where it's going to go, take note to have that language so that when bargaining comes next, you can make sure you have the backing and implementation to put it into that collective agreement. That's one. And two, for the other stewards, make sure that they do know what you just gone through, or what that member has just gone through, because it's not fair for that member to be vulnerable and have to repeat the same thing to various people. It's also, I think, a responsibility of the steward to say, hey, as a local, we need to do better. We can do better. Here is what this member has gone through. Let's make sure that the other members don't go through this.
And make sure that gets to the bargaining team, because we're going to hit a wall unless we have better language.
Absolutely. If not, include that member in that bargaining team. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that question was from Jeff from one of our libraries, I believe the Markham Public Library. So thank you, Jeff, for your question. I think that was a really great way to close out tonight. Were there any final questions before we close out? No?
When are we going for karaoke?
Right?
I really hope soon.
We could do Zoom karaoke. I'm sure we could figure it out.
I'd go to that. It felt nice. Like Adrienne said, it felt nice to be in this room in this space with you all again, for sure.
Yeah, I think like today being a Monday, knowing everything that we're all individually going through and collectively what we're doing in our own spaces and in the labor movement, I think this was really fantastic. I want to once again thank you all for attending. I want to thank all of the folks that tuned in on our live streams, and a special thank you to Fred, Adrienne, and Paige for participating in tonight's panel. I think this was awesome, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
All the thanks goes to the local and to Adrienne and Paige. You all are, everybody has good days and bad days. Today was a challenging day. You just made my day. All of you made my day.
And I want to pass on special thanks to folks who are working frontline, particularly vulnerable folks. Not everybody has the luxury to be able to stay in their house. I know you got to go there every day, and we're really rooting for you. Thank you for putting your life on the line to deliver public service that people can't live without.
Fantastic. All right, well, I'm gonna end tonight. Thank you all once again. And I can't wait I'm gonna watch this every week for like the next 52 weeks and just re-energize myself every day that, you know, you feel like you got kicked down. So I really do appreciate everyone sharing their vulnerable stories and being a part of tonight. And hopefully we can do this again in future. All right, thanks. Take care, everyone.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.